Welcome to the show, Matt and Jacqueline. How are you?
Doing great.
We're doing good.
That's good. I feel like it's a really special episode today. I'm getting two for one, and that's only ever happened once before. And I'm very excited about what we're going to talk about today. But first of all, I'm going to welcome you both, introduce you to our audience, and I'm going to go ladies before gentlemen. So, Jacqueline, you're an adjunct assistant professor of voice for the musical theatre program at Shenandoah University and on faculty at the CCM Vocal Pedagogy Institute. And Matt, you've been at Shenandoah since 2010, which must make you at least 21. You're, you're an associate professor working within the voice and musical theatre departments. You're also the coordinator of musical theatre voice and artistic director of the CCM Vocal Pedagogy Institute. Now, the reason why I have you both here is because you've both been working together on some ongoing research into the roots of the academic bias against popular music. And as you know, I'm a real advocate for CCM. That's been my life work, and my mission is now to advocate for this music and see if we can instigate change within higher education. So, as I said, highly excited to talk to you both about your research. But let's start with you giving the listeners a little bit of an insight into your own training and professional and academic journeys, how you've arrived at this point. So, Jacqueline, would you like to go first? Let's
Sure.
keep the etiquette going here.
Sure. Sure, that's fine. Thank you for having us and doing this interview. I think we both agree this is something that definitely needs to be explored more, and there needs to be more discussions about it. And just my background, how I came to where I am now, I did start out in high school singing in a show choir, and I was singing a lot of musical theater and a lot of standards, but I also had a private teacher that I was taking voice lessons from, but we did a lot of classical singing, and I really did love classical music. I wanted to go to school to not just sing, but to potentially become an opera singer. And but I also really loved singing standards. I listened to a lot of Ella Fitzgerald and Billie Holiday and Nat King Cole and all those really great standard singers. But I was also told, if you go to school for vocal performance, you can do all those things. That's what I was told, and that's what I believed. And at that time, I think that was just a very prominent message that was told to us. So as I did go to school, I got my bachelor and my master's degree in vocal performance, and then I started teaching voice lessons out of school. And when I started teaching, a lot of my students wanted to sing musical theater and contemporary music and pop rock music. And this is so embarrassing now, but I did what I think a lot of us did. I started using what I would consider more of a classical training or a bel canto type singing, and I was trying to get my students to sing Breakaway by Kelly Clarkson, but by using Caro Mio Ben first,
Oh
and
my.
using and using pure vowels and doing this, like
I would.
crescendoing. Yes.
So
Yeah.
I would break away, like something
Yeah,
like that. Sorry,
a
I've
little.
had no classical training. That was my
No, it's okay. Yeah,
impersonation.
but yeah, I mean, it was. But I knew that sound wasn't working. Like I could tell that the sound wasn't working because we started teaching right around the time that I think American Idol was
Yeah,
coming
it's coming
out,
out.
and so and I could tell that something was not working, and we both could tell that something wasn't working, and we decided that we were gonna try to figure out what to do, how to fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My experience is, it's similar, a little different. I started off in high school. I was playing in a rock band. I was doing the musicals, doing the plays. I was actually going to be a music theater, music education major at a university. But then, you have to have financial aid in the United States. My dad lost his job right when the deposit was due, so I couldn't do that. So the
Right.
only opportunity I had to go to college at all was to go to my hometown university and be a music education major there, which was classical music. Now, I'd been in classical choirs, I had been taking classical voice lessons, and so I didn't mind. I did like this music. I loved Pavarotti, and I thought if I could sing like him, I'd be happy. I'm a baritone. It never happened. It never happened. But so I got into undergrad and I started singing. I was put in an opera my very first semester. My second year, I was singing with the Dayton Opera Chorus. And at that point, my opera coach said, "Hey, if you really want to do this, you need to transfer to a top level conservatory." And he helped me transfer to the Cleveland Institute of Music, which is where I met Jackie. And so we met up there at the Cleveland Institute of Music. We both finished our bachelor's degrees there. I sang a little bit with Cincinnati Opera and Lyric Opera Cleveland while she was finishing school because I was a transfer. I was a year ahead of her. We both went to Louisiana State University and studied vocal performance there. I had a teaching assistantship, and a lot like what Jackie said, my students wanted to sing music that wasn't classical, and I was supposed to teach them classical. So I had this dilemma where I was like, well, I got to teach you Carl Romeo Ben, but you want to sing Hey Jude. And me being always a little bit rebellious, I looked at them, I was like, hey, can you learn Carl Romeo Ben and we'll work on it for like the last 4 weeks. Let's work on Hey Jude. And I started kind of jumping in and playing a little bit, but I was still using the classical tools that I had while trying to figure out what to do. We taught for a year after we, graduated from LSU, and then we got resident artist positions with Tri-Cities Opera in upstate New York. And so we moved
Wow.
up to New York. We're working at Tri-Cities Opera. Luck had it that we moved in right next door to the owner of the biggest recording studio in town. And so we got to hang out in the recording studio whenever we wanted to. I did a lot of work there with him. We had all kinds of artists coming through. There's a lot of hip hop, a lot of R&B, gospel, but also blues, country, rock and roll. So I had a great time getting to hang out in the studio, see how things were done and how they were made. And then we also started working with a friend of ours who was a music theater music director. He did a lot of coaching with us as we were going down this journey of trying to figure out what we needed to do to help these singers get to the place that they wanted to be. And along the way, what we discovered is that the tools that we had from our academic training just weren't enough.
Yes.
And that's kind of what led us on our pursuit to find new information and new ways of approaching all of this.
So where did you find that information? That is the $1 million question. So how did you transition from classical to teaching CCM? How did you develop those teaching approaches for those sounds?
Well, I'd say the first thing is that we took a voice pedagogy class together in our second year of our master's degree. And we were lucky because we had a teacher, Dr. Lorraine Sims, who now is also really well known for her work. And she was relatively new to LSU, and she taught this amazing pedagogy class. And we started learning about how the voice works. And that was super exciting for me because when I was a kid, I loved to tear things apart to figure out how they worked and put them back together. And once I discovered that I could tear apart a voice, well, not really tear it apart,
Yes.
but metaphorically
Break
tear
it
it apart.
down.
Dissect it.
Like
Break it down and then
Yes.
learn what to do. I was fascinated. So the both of us started coming across these articles about CCM pedagogy. It wasn't called that. It was barely called that at that point in time. It was just more about this is how to teach belting. And we both came up with this idea of speech level singing. We came across that and the idea that you would start
Right.
with vernacular speech. So that's where we started. And she got to help me try to learn how to sing like I speak again, which was a really interesting journey because it had gotten beaten out of me. I was very much of the be a
Yes.
baritone. Kind of stuff in my
I
throat a
can
little
hear
bit.
that in your speaking voice, by the way.
Yeah, right. So I mean, but it was there, and so but we started with that, and we were exploring everything that we could read, everything that we could get our hands on. Back then, it was watching videotapes. We had VHS tapes of
Oh,
how to sing.
yes.
Roger Love, loved to
Roger
sing.
Oh,
Love.
Roger Love.
But Roger, I mean, he's taught a lot of great people.
Yep.
He's
But I think
still
that,
going.
is he still
He is.
going?
He's
Yep.
still going.
Because, I
He's
mean,
coming up on my feed on Facebook at the moment, advertising
good.
workshops and classes.
Yeah. But I mean, we found those at the local library.
We did. And
Yeah.
we found that,
Yeah.
and we started using that info.
Seth Riggs.
Seth
So
Riggs.
SLS, so speech level singing.
That's a speech.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we were doing our own research. I mean, we were broke postgraduate
we
students.
had
We
no-
were
we
doing
had
what
no
we
money.
could.
Absolutely.
So I was flipping through something. I don't remember how I came across it, but I came across the Nats intern program. And this is when we were singing at Tri-Cities Opera. I was teaching musical theater majors at a university in upstate New York. She had a booming private studio full of music theater and rock singers and country singers. And,
Go you.
I saw this Nats intern program and I was like, that's what I need to
Yes.
do. I need to go to the Nats intern program to find out what I don't know.
Mhm.
And I got really lucky to be paired with Jeannie Levetri and Dr. Scott McCoy.
So
And
you
so
you actually hit the jackpot.
I did. I won the lottery.
Yes.
You
So,
absolutely did.
yes.
Amazing.
And so I went there and my mind was blown. I would call home about every night and
Yes.
be like, look what I just learned. I can't believe this. We're gonna, we got things to play with. And I went home and we started exploring everything I'd learned. She would help
Yeah.
me. I'd work with
You were
her.
experimenting. Well, me rediscovering my chest voice was. Do you remember
Yeah,
that?
it was a
It was
huge thing.
it was a huge thing. I mean, because
Yes.
we were doing the speech level stuff a little bit, and like I do remember helping you with that, but then it clicked when you got
Mhm.
back. It was like, oh, that's my voice.
Yeah.
That's where that went.
Yes.
That's where,
Yes.
yeah. So
That's
So from
so
there,
weird. Sorry, I just want to
yep.
make a comment here. For someone that has only ever sung in chest, I can use head voice. I have a strong head voice too, but I find that bizarre because if you're speaking that way, how does it not become natural to sing that way? See, that's just my
right.
sort of
Yeah.
where my mind goes, because I know how much work it takes to lower the larynx and to make the
Right.
the classical sounds when we're in that chest voice, or what we call M1, all the time. How does that not feel natural?
Well, we were
That's
also, I mean, part of, I think, your training as an opera singer, at least when we were doing it, was also reworking the way that we talked.
In a way, yes,
I mean, I
that
was
too.
constantly being corrected on the way that I talk because I'm from a working
uh
class family
Yeah.
in Southern
Which
Ohio, and
was
people didn't like my accent. They thought there was
You
something wrong
wanted
with
they
the way
wanted
that I
him to they
talked.
wanted him to neutralize the way that he was speaking instead of speaking from where he was from. And I mean, and the same kind of thing was happening where I was taught to speak a little bit higher, but at the same time, I mean, with classical singing, especially operatic singing, you're singing unamplified, so you have to do different
mm.
things
Oh
in
yes.
here to
Yes.
create those sounds. And I don't ever remember one teacher ever saying to me, you're not allowed to use your chest voice, you're not allowed to use your chest voice. That was not happening. I think it was just the developing of my head voice because I was a soprano. And so when we went back down to a thick fold singing place, which I didn't even know that's what that was called when you came back. We didn't even call it thick, we just called it chest voice. But just finding like, ah, oh, I can sing with an ah sound, and that felt like it was in my body instead of so high up here. So I mean,
Yes.
I don't want that to. I really did not have any teacher. I don't ever remember a teacher saying not to use my chest voice, but I just remember the way developmentally it was
More head voice,
more.
just
It was
more.
just more head voice.
Of
So
course.
yes,
Yes.
And so we then just started diving in and doing all of this research. Um, I found a job posting for a teacher at Shenandoah University, and they wanted somebody with a classical background to teach musical theater majors how to sing rock and roll. And I looked at that job ad, and I was like, that sounds a lot like me, because I had this weird background that not many people had. I applied, I got the job. And once I got here, I was surrounded by great colleagues in the musical theater program, other colleagues because the CCM Institute has been housed here for over 20 years. And I think both of us just started trying to make sure that we were going to places where we were not the smartest people in the room. Like the
Mm.
old adage goes, make sure you're not the smartest person in the room. So we would keep finding the places where we knew we could learn more. And so going to the Voice Foundation annual symposium, the Acoustic Society of America, National Center for Voice of Speech, when they put on a conference, I was there as soon as I could get there. And just soaking up everything and learning by doing with our students. And one of the great things at our institution is that we bring in casting directors and agents, and they also bring in recording engineers to campus. And so we've spent hundreds of hours working with all of these other industry professionals to really know what everybody wants and what the goals are. And over the years, we were able to put the pieces together to the point now that, our students are consistently working, they're consistently booking, they're leaving school to go do
Right.
gigs.
Mhm.
And so it's been a
brilliant.
long journey, but it's been a journey that I hope in the future other people don't have to make, because we had to figure it out on our own because we didn't get it. And I think
Yes.
that's why a big chunk of our mission now is to help other people get that information in their academic training so they don't have to go through what we had to go through to learn it on our
Yes.
own.
Sounds like you hit the jackpot a couple of times throughout your journey, one with Jeannie and Scott McCoy, but also ending up at Shenandoah. And I've visited the institute, the university, and it is a beautiful campus, but you have a remarkable faculty there also with David Meyer. You have Edry or Edry, I can,
She goes
Edry.
by both, but Edry, yeah.
Yeah, you have some you used
Catherine
to
Green,
Dr.
who's
Catherine
been, yeah,
Green
Catherine
and
Green's been my
Elizabeth
mentor from day
Glades.
one. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
with Betsy. Yeah, you've had an
Allison
amazing.
Crockett's there now on the faculty as
Yes.
well. And then our summer faculty are incredible at the Summer Institute. Ed Rice,
Yes,
Marcel,
yes.
Julie, Jess. I mean, the list goes on and on. We have amazing faculty colleagues, Marcy, Wendy.
Yes.
It's just
Oh,
an
wow.
incredible team.
Yeah. So you were lucky to get there, but they're also lucky to have you, that you're so hungry for information, and that thirst for knowledge would also then benefit the university. And you're now the artistic director for the CCM Vocal Pedagogy Institute. So how did you come into that role? And tell us a little bit about the institute as it is now.
Yeah, so the former person who was running the institute decided to move on and to be able to explore some other things. And so the dean told me that I was going to be taking that role, and that's where I would be moving into. And I knew that there was no way to replicate what had already been done, but rather to set up a new institute with a new mindset to really try to propel things forward. And my thought is there are a lot of ways to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And what we can all agree on is how the voice works, because we have research that tells us how it actually works. So I wanted to build an institute where we talked about the facts that we know from voice research, and then talked about all the different ways that we could get to that place.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have the widespread from me, who ends up being really technical, to Marcel, who's on our faculty, who's really artistic. And she's getting ready to go over, I think, to Nepal, to study.
Yeah.
She's going over on the other side of the world to go study, the singing styles that have existed for thousands of years, to bring that information back.
Amazing.
Right. And
Amazing.
so,
Yes.
and we have I have songwriters on my team. I have SLPs on my team. I have high school choir directors on the team, and so we have people that all come together, and we have this shared agreement that vocal function matters and that evidence-based practice matters, but we all do it a little differently, and we all respect each other for the differences that we have. Even Jackie and I, though, we've been doing this together for, since we've been together,
Since we've been
basically.
together.
20 years, but 20 years of exploring our voices together. She still does things differently than I do, and I do things a little differently than she does, but it works, and our students still get the results.
Yes.
And what we really believe is that every singer has their own unique needs, and you have to find the guide that's the right fit for them. So at the Institute, I have such a broad cross-section of faculty, so that every person who comes to the Institute can find somebody on the faculty that they can connect with.
Yes.
That they can go, look, Matt's too technical for me, but you know what? The way that Catherine explains how to cross over from classical to doing belt work, that resonates with me so much. So I'm going to go glue myself to Catherine. And then that person can go and pick her brain for the entire Institute and figure out how to apply all the concepts. And they can find that in any of our different faculty members.
Brilliant.
And I think that's what makes it really special in the format that it is right now, is it allows people to come and to have open discussions for people who are certified in ESTL to say, hey, in ESTL they say this, but you're saying something different. Why? And I can honestly say I respect what Jo did. I think she did amazing work. I think that her colleagues who now carry on that work are doing great things. They have plenty of people performing in Broadway shows. But I do it a little bit differently because of this. And this is why I take this approach. And so it's not about a battle of pedagogical approaches, but of trying to gain a better understanding of the world that we all work in. Because Jo was working in New York City and working in a world where she had developed certain tools. Seth Riggs was working in LA where he developed certain tools for certain clients and their needs. And so each teacher developed their methods to meet the needs of the clients they served. But
Yes.
our clients who come to the Institute are often from Middle America. And they have to be generalists. They're the only voice teacher in their community who is willing to teach anything that's not classical. They have to be generalists. And so for them to be able to understand all these different tools and which ones might work better in different situations is what we feel serves them best and sets them up for success and long-term growth.
Yes, and I think what you're teaching essentially is student-centered teaching approaches, whereas I think the problem with methodologies, it's a one-size-fits-all, and that's not student-centered learning. And I don't bag methodologies. I think it has offered people a great starting place to begin their teaching careers, but I think it's also very important to develop a toolbox of approaches and work out the tool that's going to work for the student that's in front of you in that moment of time, because what worked last week may not work next week because they come in with different issues that have happened to them psychologically, emotionally, physically as well. So okay.
That's why we say, we teach a system, not a method. A method tells you what you have to do step by step. A system gives you an approach as a starting place from which you deviate as necessary for, like you said, the student that's standing in front of you and their particular needs.
Yes, yes. Now, we're going to go into your research, and what inspired me to reach out to you was this article that you've written. I don't know, and that is the one that was in the Journal of Singing in, what month was it? Because I downloaded it before it actually came out.
Is that the one, 2012?
No, this is the newest one. This is the
The
one that's
newest
coming
one.
out. It'll be out in print in January. We wanted it to be a digital release.
Yes,
So it's
I already have
digital
it.
release. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And it's the emerging future of collegiate voice instruction. And it's updated from the 2014 journal article that you put out, along with David Meyer. And as soon as I saw that, I had to download it and read it immediately, because I cited the 2014 article right through my thesis and also in my book. So, because there really wasn't any other information that I could cite that was research-based about the status quo of higher education institutions and the opportunity to learn CCM. So I just want to start, and maybe let's just put a little disclaimer out there, because we don't want to put people off what we're going to be talking about. And that is that we are not here to put down other styles of singing. So it's not about putting down classical music. I have, and you have, the highest respect for our classical colleagues. And it's not about that. For me, as a CCM teacher, ex-performer, advocate, I just want to be able to stand alongside my classical colleagues and be respected and valued in the same way. So I just want to put that out there.
Yeah.
Okay. And so can we start with this question? Do you both acknowledge there is a bias against popular music in higher education?
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So now we've
started.
Yes, sorry. I just want to
say-
address the elephant in the room straight up.
Yes, it's changing, and we can't say that it is definitely, it's tilting, it's tipping. We're getting closer towards the tipping point where it's going to really tip. I don't think we're quite there yet. Not from the stories I'm hearing from other colleagues. I don't think we're quite at the tipping point. But we're not at where it was 13 years ago when we came to Shenandoah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's definitely
No,
not where when we started.
it's no,
Yes.
I
I
don't
mean,
know.
one of my graduate advisors said to me, I don't quite, he said, I need to talk to you about what you're teaching. And I was like, okay. And he said, I'm concerned about your future. And I said, okay, why? He's like, you really seem set on learning to do this musical theater and pop rock stuff. And I just don't think you're going to be able to find a job doing that. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay. And
Okay.
it didn't work out that way. Now, it worked
Mm.
out pretty well in my favor, but
I think so. I think
yeah.
so. So, what has inspired both of you to do this research work? Because you started researching quite a number of years ago.
Yeah. So in 2012 or 2010, when I got here, my position was created because the theater department wanted this pop rock specialist. The voice department wasn't so keen on it. It's different now. Now we have great relationships. But they were very hesitant to bring in a pop rock specialist who only taught pop rock was a big move. And so I met some resistance with things that I wanted to change and things that I wanted to do different. And I was meeting resistance from other colleagues, just at conferences and things that I had been attending. And what I really wanted to know is why? Why is this such a problem? And so that was my first big research question that I started with is why does this bias exist? And if we understand that, then maybe we can start to move forward and move beyond it. And so in 2012, I gave my first talk on ethno-historical barriers against contemporary commercial music voice pedagogy at the Voice Foundation annual symposium in Philadelphia. And what I talked about there was how the aristocrats in New York City were trying to create a cultural landscape that could rival what was seen in Europe, which was the homeland for most of the immigrants in that part of the country at the time. And that the aristocrats were building these opera houses, fully donor funded. They were making a special elevated place of practice for this music. They believed that this music was superior and that everybody should be taught to like it. And there was also, I was starting to find hints of some pretty racist language also referring to Black Americans at the time and the way that they talked about the way the Black Americans sang. And so I started saying in 2012, look, I think that some of our biases have been passed down generationally. And that's how I ended this talk. I was like, if we go back to our great-great-grand teacher and we look at what our great-great-grand teacher was living in a world, they were living in a world where racism was rampant and classism was rampant. And then they taught the next generation who taught the next generation who taught us. And so if this is a system where you have to, it's a political system, academia is, everything is voted on. You can't make any changes without voting. You can't get through the program without being voted on in the form of juries. So you have a voting system that determines who gets through and who doesn't. And that system had its roots back in this period. And I knew that that's where this all started. Well, we had been talking about this a lot, and then we love to go antique shopping. And so we're out antique shopping one day, and we see these magazines called Etude Magazine, and I pick them up. I'm like, Jackie, here's a music teacher magazine. Let's look at this.
Which I knew what these were. I don't think that you really. My piano teacher, when I was in middle school into high school, she had a lot of cats, and she had a lot of Etude magazines. She had all of her teachers. She had a lot of her previous teachers' Etude magazines. Do you know what the Etude magazine is?
No.
Okay. So here's one of them that we have, and this is from 1940, which we can even talk about the cover here in a minute. But it's got ads in here. It's got articles written by different composers, conductors.
Incredible.
There's sheet music in here. There's all kinds of stuff, and I cannot remember the date that it was started.
It was around 1889.
Yeah. So, but it was meant for the private music teacher, and a lot of these teachers would keep these magazines and they would refer back to them because they would have sheet music in it. And if you are a private teacher, like 100 years ago, you really had no other outlet. You had no other community. You would just get these magazines and you would read them. and we start looking through them to see if we can find voice teaching stuff. Like, what were they talking about? Were they, talking about bel canto? What were they saying? We would love to know. We start looking through them, and we start uncovering some
just
not so
blatantly racist
yeah
talk about the way that people sing.
yeah
And so, and,
Really?
trigger
yeah
warning of
yeah
some language,
yeah
but the term that's used a lot is savage, and singing like the savage.
Aha.
trashy
Aha.
music,
Trash
Aha.
like
music.
ragtime was
Yes.
considered trashy.
And
Yes.
talking about shout singing, and shout
Mm-hmm.
singing was specifically associated with Black Americans at that time, and they always talked about it in a negative light. And
Hmm.
all of a sudden, a light bulb went off, and I was like, this has got something to do with what we're researching. We've
Yeah.
been digging and knowing we were
Yeah.
missing stuff, and this might be what we're missing. And so Jackie comes home and goes down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, so because I had nothing else to do. It was during COVID.
It was during
we
COVID.
had like nothing
So-
else.
This
to
is
do.
no. This
just
is
got-
amazing.
We just got vaccinated, but we're like, we're still gonna stay home, and like, so I start looking up. I'm like, well, I wonder if we can find online. I mean, these were written 100 years ago. I'm sure that we can find all these articles. So I start like Googling like in the Etude, because you can go to the Etude website and you can put in keywords and then articles will pop up. So I started putting in trashy music, or I put trashy in there, and all kinds of stuff came up. There's even there's a really great dissertation I'm reading right now called "Evil at a Glance." I cannot remember the guy who
What?
wrote it, but it's
When was it written?
But it was maybe
Like-
1996, maybe
Yeah,
2002.
a lot of them were in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, maybe, and I can get you that information afterwards. But it's really great because it's talking about like the different political cartoons that were in there. And so then I start researching, I start looking, and then I start noticing names that are popping up that I'm recognizing. And there's one issue in particular from I think 1924 called the jazz problem. And I was like, oh, there's a jazz problem. Like, there's a
Houston,
problem with jazz.
we have a problem.
I had
It's
no
called-
idea.
it's
that
called
was a
jazz.
problem, but it was a problem, and so I start reading like, oh, there's a whole magazine, a whole issue dedicated to the jazz problem.
And this is important because
because I'm going to go on a tangent. I could
But-
go for years on this.
But the jazz problem issue is really important because it really shows what people were actually thinking. They say the quiet part out loud. And so whereas for a lot of times, like you could tell and you could read between the lines how they felt about jazz, in this issue, people
it had
come
Mahler,
out.
it had Gustav Mahler. Gustav
Mahler's in a
was-
different issue,
Oh, he's in
talking
a
about
different
something.
issue, okay.
But it's Sousa, and the person who's important is Frank Damrosch,
Yes.
who's the head of Juilliard.
He
created
created Juilliard.
What's now-
what is
now-
now Juilliard. It was not called.
Yes.
Institute of Musical Arts. But
Yes.
So, and Frank Damrosch was a huge figure in New York society at that time, in their musical society. And
He's
he
a German immigrant.
is the person that says this is the music of a primitive people. It might be funny, but it's not real. And basically, it's garbage. And some of the terminology that he used is kind of blatantly racist, along with some of the other language. And we realized that we weren't, this hunch that we had for a long time that this was part of the issue was part of the issue. And that magazine kind of nails, it was the thing when we saw that, we're like, okay, so we are onto something.
But
There
then-
is an issue here.
But then my wheels kept turning. I'm like, who's Frank Damrosch? Because I had no idea who he was at the time. So I start Googling him, find out Juilliard, and they're like, okay, so who's the guy who created Etude? How did this all happen? How did, like, this is a guy saying this stuff about popular music at the time, which is jazz, and he's definitely against it. And he also helped create Juilliard. So then we look at Etude. We find out that Theodore Presser created Etude magazine. Who is Theodore Presser? So then we find out who he is. He ended up creating he was a pianist, but he wasn't that great of a pianist. He went to Germany because that's where everybody was going in the late 1800s.
Yes.
Everybody was going
Yes.
to Germany because that's where you're going to learn
Yes.
how to play piano better.
Mhm.
So he goes there. He loves Leipzig. He loves all the things that are going on there. He comes back to America. I don't know all the ins and outs, but he was teaching at different universities. I think little universities here and,
And
there.
he
But
wanted
then
music teachers to be
he
taken more seriously.
he did, and he created the MTNA, which is the Music Teacher National Association, and he created the MTNA, which was an organization for music teachers to get together. But when he created the MTNA, which I think was really great. I mean,
Yeah,
we
it
wouldn't
had a
have,
good.
we wouldn't, I don't think we would have NATS. We
We
wouldn't
wouldn't,
have,
and
we
now
would
Yes.
not
it's
have
MTNA.
NATS. We would not have
Yes.
NASM,
Yep.
which is, you know, accreditation. So we wouldn't have all these things. I think what he really wanted was a really great thing. But what he ended up doing with the MTNA is then he created the Etude magazine. And so if you, I came up with a whole flow chart and I don't have it with me right now, but he created a trifecta. And this was right around the time, this was right after a really great big recession that happened in the 1890s. And he created the MTNA, and if you have a membership to the MTNA, you get a discount for the Etude magazine, or no, for sheet music.
Yep.
Is that how did it work?
So it's you get
so
so
Oh my
they-
gosh.
basically you get into MTNA, you then subscribe to Etude magazine.
Yes.
If you sign enough students up, you can win prizes for signing your students up to Etude magazine. Then they get a monthly publication that does have sheet music in it, but it also has articles about how they should think about music. And if you look at the
Yes.
cover of this cover is very
Yes.
telling
Yeah.
of this magazine, because what they wanted you to think about music is that
this
music
music.
possesses powers that exalt and ennoble mankind. And on this image, you'll see the church, the school, and the home. Because the belief was that music was from God,
Sacred.
and music was a sacred thing.
Yep.
It was a disciplined thing, and it would help you become a better human. And throughout this magazine, they talk about it being our duty as music teachers to reach down to the
Right.
common people and lift them up to appreciate good music. Not to teach them the music that they like, which is popular. Now, they also, in some issues, it depends on who's writing. Some people did say, look, we should take advantage of popular music, let them play that, and then lift them up to actually learn what good music is. So then not only do the teachers share this with their students, the teachers then can buy sheet music at a discount from Theodore Presser's publishing house and then sell that sheet music
Yes.
to their students. And then Presser is making such a great revenue stream, he goes around and starts buying up all of the other music publishing houses.
Yes.
And takes over a whole city block
It
in
took
Philadelphia.
like two years. It took 2 years for him to do that. He had a publishing company in Lynchburg, Virginia, and it was small. And then within 2 years, he ended up in Philadelphia. It was huge. I mean,
And
he took. So this is like all private music teachers were reading this. This was sacred. This was the newspaper for them.
Well,
This sounds like a cult.
well, it's right. So, but
It does. I
and
mean,
it
if
certainly-
it was a religion, if it was
I
a
know.
religion, it would be a cult, because you're indoctrinating people and you're telling them what they should like, what they shouldn't like, what is good singing, what is bad singing, what is good music, what is cultured music. It is so wrong and
Right.
so unethical on so many levels.
And it wasn't even just music that was talked about in there. There's also political things that are it's social evils, even like social things that people are doing that would be evils. That's Etude. And then
but I think the key
Yeah,
thing
yes.
is Etude hits a peak subscriber run of 240,000. So there's 240,000 people a month getting this magazine. Now, another thing that's important to understand is like technology is always changing things in this world, and the magazine was technology for that
was
era.
media. That was the media.
That was media. And so there is a magazine explosion that happens in the late 19th century and the early 20th century, where there's a magazine for almost everything that you can think of. There are around 10 other music magazines at this time. Etude's the most popular and the one that's really directed at teachers. But you're right. This does have the impact of indoctrinating everybody who reads it. Now, again, Theodore Presser was doing good things. We have to acknowledge that Theodore Presser set up scholarships for kids who were poor and couldn't afford lessons. Theodore Presser set up a home for, well, he called it at first for aged musicians. No one would enroll in going to this home. So then he changed it to a retirement community. And then he made a home for teachers, music teachers, who didn't have enough means to support themselves. They could go to this retirement home. For his employees at his publishing house, he built an entire community for them where they could get houses and apartments at half the cost of what they would have been in the public marketplace. So he cared deeply about people, but he's also a product of his era. And
Yes.
all of this is taking place, and what's important is MTNA comes out of this. Later comes the National Association for Schools of Music, which is the accrediting body that to this day accredits all schools of music in the United States. Out of this group comes the National Association of Teachers of Singing, NATS. And also out of this group, well, from NASM and the College Music Society and all of this comes the idea of a doctorate degree. And the doctorate degree gets started in 1953. And that starts really, now you have to have, we start moving and accelerating towards you need a doctorate to teach in academia. And that date is important because the structure for the doctorate degree is built in 1953. And in 1954 in the United States is the case Brown versus Board of Education. And that is the time when the Supreme Court rules that segregation is illegal. And we start seeing the desegregation of the schools. So when you're looking at the time that our professional organizations were developed, they were developed in a time of segregation and in a time when popular music was vaudeville shows, which have their roots in minstrel shows, which also includes ragtime music, the blues, and jazz, which all come from Black Americans. So popular music isn't just popular. They had parlor songs. Parlor songs were written by white composers. They still didn't like them in Etude magazine. Some people advocated for them. A lot were against it. They tolerated that. But then when you really get into jazz and the blues, you start seeing a lot of intolerance. That's where people start drawing a line and saying, no, that's not okay. And actually, we were already doing that. You're just saying that Black people came up with this, but actually the Irish did, and this is our thing, but it's not a good thing.
Or we've been doing syncopation. They stole syncopation from
us. And
that's one of the things that Gustav Mahler says too.
Yes. Who's also says, and Gustav Mahler again says the part out loud that we had a feeling was there but hadn't found yet, where he says in his own writing, he writes an article for Etude, and he's talking about different people, and he says, I cannot bring myself to believe that all men are created equal. That is beyond my comprehension.
I know.
So again, it's not like this isn't, I think what's so hard is when you have these conversations, this isn't about canceling anybody, but this is just understanding. If we go back to the core question, which is why? Why is popular music not in academia? This is why.
Absolutely.
And I know, because I know that we spent a lot of time on Etude, but then
no, but it's important.
But also, no, it is important. But one of the things too, like, where did this come from? Where did this thought that popular music is so bad, or that European music is so much higher? And you have to also look at the Gilded Age. You have to look at a Reconstruction after the Civil War, and you had this second industrial revolution that was happening at that time, and you had all these really rich people like the Rockefellers, J.P. Morgan, Carnegie, who are some of the other I'm trying to think of other big Vanderbilts, and they were high money, very elite. And so in the Gilded Age, they had a type of etiquette or a culture that they wanted to hold on to. But where did that culture come from? One of the people that wrote about the culture of the Gilded Age and where they wanted to keep that elitism was Ward McAllister. And he wrote, what was the name of the book? He wrote a whole book about...
Well, he went to Europe and he studied etiquette in Europe.
And then he brought it back, and he was hosting parties with the Astor family, and making sure that all these European ideals were still staying there. So if it wasn't European, it was not good. It was not elite. One of the places that I go to and I think of is where this kind of culture change happened. I'm not going to get too into it, but would be the Astor Place riot that happened, I think it was in the late 1840s, where it was a riot that happened where people actually died in New York City. And it was literally American performing against European performing, and of Shakespeare. And the Americans were not happy with the European, and it happened in Astor Place. It happened at the Astor Place Opera House. And they weren't happy with it. They did not want this European coming in and doing Shakespeare acting the way that the European was. They wanted to keep their American way of doing it.
And they burnt the place down.
They did. They burnt.
So there were gunshots. The militia was brought in. People were killed. The place was burnt down. So when we talk about a culture war, this is literally violence being instigated over high culture and low culture in the founding of this country's artistic landscape.
And you fast forward 50 years, and you have the Gilded Age, and you have all the rich people having all these big fancy parties and everything, and then you have the Rockefellers and you have the Carnegies who are funding some of these universities and these symphony halls, and they're part of it. And so
Okay.
if you have Carnegie, who's part of this, like, I must keep everything very high art, it must be high art, it must be European, and he's hanging out with Frank Damrosch, which he was, and he helped create and fund and build Juilliard, or a lot of those rich people were doing that at that time. They're not gonna want popular music there because it's not elite enough for them.
And
Mm-hmm.
what's interesting too, and again, this is a United States problem. Here we charge people for college in astronomical sums of money.
Yes,
We've
yes.
always, so college did start at one point in time in being free or super low cost. Eventually people realized, oh, if you go to college, you make more money. Maybe they should pay for that. Then they started charging
Yes.
for college. Then some of the colleges would give out loans from the college itself. But you basically couldn't go to college unless you had family money until the 1950s. And the only reason we get funding for anybody to go to college who's not from the upper levels of income was because of our technology war with Russia when we had the race to space. And the government realized we need more scientists, we need more mathematicians, we need more engineers if we're going to keep up with the Russians. So they create a federal student loan program so that anybody can get into college because they need people in order to make something happen. But that doesn't really open the door for arts. We see then the
No.
GI Bill start to open the door where people can go to major in things. We see a more music programs starting to come up. Donors are starting to give money to create these schools. It's not until the 1960s where we really start getting student loans that help enable the growth and expansion of all of these things. And that's right around the same time that we see a growth and explosion of opera in the United States. Opera America is founded in 1970 with 20 member companies. They get all the way up over 100 companies by the 1990s. That's their peak. And in their peak, 50% of their ticket sale or their budget was coming from ticket sales. Now it's around 29%.
Mm-hmm.
So opera had an explosion of popularity, but you look at it and it was because of Pavarotti, it was because of the three tenors. There was more and more of a growth of the middle class, people who had money, who wanted to be part of this cultural world that had been created during the Gilded Age. And there's admiration for it. But corporations also had big control over what we listened to because they controlled the record labels. They were in control of the
Right.
record labels and what we listened to. But then when you get to the 1990s, and this gets a little bit into the SWOT article, is when you get to the 1990s and we get Napster and we get internet music streaming, now anybody can put out music. And now you as a listener can listen to anything you want to, whenever you want to. As
Exactly.
that starts exploding, we start to see more and more growth of things. We see the growth of musical theater, right? Musical theater starts to explode as well. And now we no longer have only this high level of culture that the aristocracy is controlling. We now have a consumer-based culture that's been growing since the 50s with Elvis Presley and the beginnings of rock and roll. It was coming out of the jazz era as well, even though they tried to suppress it. And it just snowballs and snowballs until today, the upper class now listen to rock and roll. I mean, Kanye married into a very upper class family.
Oh,
And
yes.
so,
So upper
you know,
class.
yeah. And so, there's, it's a different world now. And that's what we're bringing up in part of the SWOT article is music enrollment is falling. It's without a doubt it's falling. It's projected to fall worse than it already has. And so that's why we also feel like now, if there's ever been a time that it's been more urgent, it's now. Opera companies are struggling. They're closing. University music programs are struggling. Some of them are closing. We know that the enrollment trends are going down, and we know it could be as bad as a 59% decrease in enrollment 10 years from now compared to what we have now, which is already 33% down from 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so, this is why the history is fascinating, is it
Yeah.
It
starts to
is.
explain
It
how
is.
we got here
Yeah.
and then how it
Yes.
started to unravel and why
Yes.
there's never been a better time than now to start looking around and going, okay, so the world has changed. We are no longer making music only for the aristocracy. We no longer believe that there's only one holy music from
Right.
God that we must lift everybody else up to
Right.
believe in. We now believe in a multicultural world where everybody brings music that is connected to their own humanity that deserves to be heard and deserves to be respected and honored in the same way as the music from our past. I have
Mm.
Slovak and Hungarian ancestry, right? My grandmother was really attached to classical music. I grew up with it in my family. So I had some, respect and honor for it because it was around in my life.
Mm.
But we have so many people in our country now that do not come from a European ancestral heritage who do not connect with that music. It's not part of their cultural heritage.
Yes.
And there's a
Yes.
term called acculturation, and acculturation is when a dominant political body forces the subdominant body to give up their culture and adopt the other culture in order to be accepted into the community. And I
Mm.
talked about this in another presentation I gave at the Voice Foundation. And I said that essentially, and I named a county out in LA. This county is like 90% Latinx. That if you are a kid, a high school kid in this community who wants to be a music teacher, you have to give up your cultural heritage. Let's say your family immigrated here from Mexico. You have to give up that cultural heritage. You have to adopt the art song heritage. American, European, you still are adopting art song heritage because that's the only way you can get into 90 something percent of music schools in this country for music education.
Yes.
You then
Yes.
get in to study music education and you have to give up your cultural heritage for 4 years to pass your juries because the only way you pass your juries is if you sing your French, German, and Italian art song. The student then graduates 4 years later, a master of this European cultural heritage, to go back to their community, their Latinx community, where they then are going to have to teach the people in their community who do not identify with that cultural heritage, and they're stuck to have to figure out how to do it on their own. And
Oh my
and
gosh.
we can't operate that way and
No,
expect to
no.
have a better, more just society. Have to
Yes.
start honoring and acknowledging everyone's cultural heritage deserves a place, and that
Hmm.
we have to honor where it comes from and teach it. And we've got a lot of work to do in that area.